Welcome to the Skrmetta Show. We are back in the studio doing this thing for you, telling you everything you need to know about all the happenings going on. Good news is all the bad stuff is behind us. Good news is there's no such thing as controversy. There's no such thing as racial injustice. Look, all of us behind us. Okay, that was weeks ago. Look, I got a whole list of things to talk about on this show. Let's just take a look at them. Let's see. Confederate flag to be destroyed. Okay, that's got to be old. Confederate statues torn down. Old. Christopher Columbus statue destroyed. Old. Jimmy Kimmel canceled for blackface. Old. Brett Favre compares Pat Tillman and Colin Kaepernick. Seems weird. Old. This is unbelievable, ladies and gentlemen. Honestly, what's going on right now in the world is so terrifying, so outrageous. I'm reading the book of Revelations just to go to sleep at night. I don't know where to turn. Now, before we continue any further, let me remind you all that this is the James Skrmetta Show, presented to you by Mackhard, Anderson & Associates, PLLC. This is the show. This is where you need to be. If you're not subscribed, if you're not listening or following, I know you're listening because I'm talking to you. And if I'm not talking to you, who the hell am I talking to? So if you're not subscribed or following or all that stuff, get your life together. This is really the only thing you can rely on nowadays because everything else is shot to hell. So we're going to do our best here to unpack some of this. I can't promise we're going to unpack all of it because that could, honest to God, take 5 to 10 hours. Look, let me preface this. Now, as my friend Ryan would say, let me preface this. But this show is not scripted. This show is not written, okay? I come out here, I turn the mic on, I turn the camera on, I let it rip. And I think y'all appreciate that. I think that makes it a better show. I don't write these podcasts. I don't have a team of writers, like some of these other podcast hosts who can't write their own shows because they're too busy DMing 16-year-old girls and too busy, we don't have to get into it. So I'm not going to walk up here like Ben Shapiro with 50 stats and historical data and whatever else. I'm just going to tell you how it is. All right? A lot of what we're going to talk about is incredibly complex, incredibly difficult to talk about in one podcast. And honestly, when I was getting the stories, we do the bullet points of the stories to hit. When I was getting those together, I was like, man, I feel like I've already talked about this. Like, I feel like I've already done this. I feel like I've already kind of went in on a lot of this stuff. I was trying to think, did we cover the flag, the Confederate flag, when we were talking about police brutality? Do we cover police training? What did we cover? Because it's all overlapping. And as I was going through it, I was thinking, oh, well, I said this on the podcast 3 weeks ago. We had a podcast titled "The South Will Rise Again in Jest." That was like 2 months ago. And now we're basically in a civil war. So it's something else. I mean, honestly, it's something else. I have a lot of different, interests and hobbies or whatever. And I watch, or I'm in tuned with a ton of different, very specific genres. Whether it's video games or wrestling or sports or cooking or, whatever it may be. When I went on Twitter, I think 2 days ago, I swear to you, every single genre that I'm interested in, every single topic, someone was getting canceled, someone was raping something, somebody was in blackface. I'll give you some great examples. Boom, I go over to the video game industry. There's like 15 different people at Twitch getting caught out for sexual misconduct. It's like 3 or 4 huge YouTubers, huge Twitch streamers. I skip out of that. I can't have enough of this. I go over to the entertainment section. Jimmy Kimmel's in blackface. Justin Bieber's getting alleged of rape. I say, okay, hold on a second. I got to go somewhere else. So I go over here. I'm in the cooking world. The editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit magazine and website, he's in Puerto Rican face. I didn't even know that was a thing. He's in Puerto Rican face. He resigns while also being hit with some allegations of misogyny. So then that's going on. I go over to wrestling. There's probably 10 wrestlers getting accused of sexual misconduct, and a couple of them get fired. Joey Ryan, people like that, they just get canned. didn't even see that, missed it. I go back over to the podcasting world. Chris D'Elia's getting allegations for, grooming, grooming underage women. It's out of control, and it's really gotten to a point now. Oh, and then I go to sports. What's going on in sports? We got nooses hanging in NASCAR drivers' lockers and Confederate flags being flown over the sky. I go over to the Premier League and soccer over in Europe. They're flying a banner over that says "White Lives Matter." Right now is a good time. And honestly, this is kind of why we didn't do a podcast last week, because I can feel and I've said this on the podcast. And if I have $1 for every time I say, and I've said this before, I'll probably end up having $1 million by the end of the show. And I'm a little wound up because I got my Laird Hamilton coffee, and it's incredible. Laird Hamilton coffee. It's not sponsored, but good God, go get you some. It's infused with mushrooms. Joshy D, great listener, friend of the pod, of course, sent me a bag. So I'm a little wound up. So this rant could go any different direction. So the point is that, and I've said it before, it's really hard to be checked in when everything is going to absolute hell. There is no escape, right? There is no escape from, it's not even reality, because I don't live in that reality of just like racism and sexual assault and all blackface and all this stuff. So I was like, okay, well, I don't want to deal with that. So if I can't watch sports, play video games, watch wrestling, watch TV, listen to music, what do I need to do? And we're getting closer and closer to almost just a cultural reset. And maybe it's not even cultural, more like a societal reset where maybe we should just all go back into the woods. Just go back into the cave, start over as cavemen, come back out and start over. I was just talking this weekend and saying, this is one, I would consider myself pretty involved. Social media, whatever. This is one of those times where I'm like, maybe we just got to go to Hawaii. Maybe we just got to go to an island, get a tiki hut, get a surfboard, live off the land, and just disconnect. Like, it's all just not worth it. When you look around right now, everything is falling apart. The social constructs of things like money and government and hospitals and whatever else, totally going to hell. We're in the middle of a pandemic. That's the backdrop for all this. Then we're also in kind of a civil war. Then everything else is totally, the wool is being pulled over our eyes. The Jimmy Kimmels, the Hollywood celebrities, the late night. People used to come home from work and sit down and watch their late night television, and that was their escape. That was their lens into the world. That was their, I'm going to sit here and listen to David Letterman tell me things are going to be okay. And now, that ain't happening. Because if the late night talk show hosts are raping someone, they're in blackface. So it's just to me, it's a really awful time to just be doing anything. Like, I honestly feel for everyone right now. Every age. The young people who are just trying to start their lives, trying to start their careers, trying to start who they are, and I mean the people who are like 18 to 24, they're trying to mold themselves and to become the person they're going to be. It's really hard to do that right now when you're in like the worst period in human history. The older people who want to retire and enjoy life, they're wearing a damn mask to go to the grocery store. They can't travel anywhere. They're the high-risk people. Then you have the people in the middle, the people who are a few years, maybe half a decade or so into their career. They're kind of climbing the corporate ladder. They may be bringing a family into this world. Everything has been halted. They can't do anything. They don't have anywhere to go. They don't have anything to do. Start a family. What? Build a bunker. Start a family. Get a fallout bunker. That's where we're at. It's a trying time. And it's hard even to do the podcast because it's hard for me to sit down and go, okay, what's our topics today? Racism, Confederate flag, Pat Tillman, racism, blackface, sexual assault. Okay, this is going to be a fun hour. You know what I mean? So, but we have to trudge on. And so I'm going to offer, I'm honestly just kind of not going to beat around the bush here. I think we're going to go in pretty good. And I don't think either side of the aisle is going to really enjoy this one. I think, we're going to kind of strip away both sides of the argument for multiple topics, and we're going to let the wind just kind of guide us, to be honest here. And we're going to start this whole party with, let's start with Jimmy Kimmel. So, when Jimmy Kimmel transitioned between being the Man Show host and Jimmy Kimmel, when he transitioned from that into being a late night host, it was like, okay, whatever, it happens. People start in a weird way, and then they can just kind of move into a different direction. Howard Stern did it. Howard Stern was a complete shock jock, and he went from being a shock jock to probably being the best interviewer in American history. I mean, he was, Conan O'Brien went from writing for The Simpsons to being maybe the best late night host of all time. David Letterman was a weatherman. So people can kind of transition. So it was strange to see, but it was whatever. Then when he turned into being like the voice of a lot of these like social justice and woke movements, and he was real anti-guns, and he was real big into universal health care, and he was crying all the time, and it was like, okay, if someone has forced Jimmy Kimmel to make a real move, someone has told him, hey man, it's not good enough that you're just on this side of the aisle, you have to be the voice. And then you start seeing Jimmy Kimmel, he's the host of every Emmys, he's the host of all these shows, he's the host of Whose Lines It Anyways, and it's Hollywood. I mean, it's Hollywood. This is the kind of stuff that happens, right? Play by my rules, and you'll get these opportunities. So, whenever that was happening, I was thinking, is this the same guy who ended every one of his shows by girls jumping on trampolines? Like, is this the same guy who had Andy Milonakis looking like a 13-year-old buying beer on the side of the road? Something's not adding up here. Like, we talk about Donald Trump, being president, and Donald Trump not being very presidential because he was the host of The Apprentice. Well, it's not very late night host, or not very woke of Jimmy Kimmel to be out there putting himself way out there when everybody knows his past. Crank Yankers had characters that were mentally challenged, overly racist, sexualized. Then the Man Show was the most 90s toxic masculinity. It was a Playboy magazine come to life, basically. And yeah, it worked for the mid 90s, but it's hard to be like, hey, Donald Trump, you're not very presidential when your resume includes girls jumping on trampolines getting soaked by a super soaker. And everyone knows Jimmy Kimmel's past of blackface and the Karl Malone things and all of that. So now that this is all surfacing, and somehow now it's all surfacing, Jimmy Kimmel's canceled. Bottom line, it hasn't happened yet, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to tell you right now, you do not walk back from what Jimmy Kimmel's done. And I'm not saying what Jimmy Kimmel's done is wrong. We talked about blackface. We talked about Jimmy Fallon blackface last podcast. But you don't, in this climate, walk back from saying the N-word, which Jimmy Kimmel did on multiple songs, from being in blackface a lot. It wasn't one skit. The Karl Malone skit was a recurring skit of Jimmy Kimmel's, right? You don't come back from all of that. And then the more that comes out, the worse it's going to get. I think Jimmy Kimmel will retire, personally. I mean, he's done, I think, 18 years or 19 years of late-night talk show. He's obviously good. I think if I was him, I would say, you know what? I've got a family. I've got my career. I did what I did. I probably did everything I ever wanted to do. It's a really good time for me to get out of this now because it's just going to get more woke and more woke. And the more people dig into the Man Show, the worse it's going to be. Trust me. That's what I would do if I was Jimmy Kimmel. He will be canceled. And it's really interesting to see these. I don't know what else to call them. So if you're taking offense to me calling them social justice warriors or woke or whatever, I don't know how else to get it across to the people I'm talking about. Hopefully, the listeners of this podcast know what I'm talking about. But it's very interesting to see those champions fall to their own devices, to their own traps. These people who cast this net of like purity, and anybody who's not pure gets caught in it. For them to get caught into the net, it's very weird, and it's not surprising. It's not surprising that not everyone is just good. You know, I mean, Joe Rogan, they tried to cancel Joe Rogan this week. Joey Diaz, they tried to cancel him because guys are just really anyone, not guys, but guys, girls, whoever. If you have hours and hours and hours of them just riffing and talking and drinking and having fun and whatever, and you take clips out of context or you pile stuff together, yeah, you could probably have almost everyone on some pretty bad looks, especially those who worked through the 80s, through the 90s, through the 2000s into now. Because just like we said with Jimmy Fallon, it wasn't really thought of to be bad to do blackface in the early 90s or mid 90s. It wasn't really that big of a deal to play a mentally challenged person in a movie. And I mean, like, Ben Stiller seems like he was playing a mentally challenged person in every movie he did. You know, I mean, it's one of those deals where, would you do it now? No, you wouldn't do it now. But you wouldn't do a lot of stuff now. You know, I mean, time, and it's hard to put the rules of today on the memories of the past. It's really dangerous to do that, I think. I mean, you know, you hear stories about how it's like, oh, well, my dad let me, not my dad, but, well, and my dad. But it's like, my dad, gave me $2 to go down to the grocery store a block down the street and go buy a 6-pack of beer. And the grocery attendant, said, hey, who are you buying this for? And I said, oh, my dad. And they said, oh, tell him I said, hey. And he gave me the 6-pack of beer. And I'm 8 years old walking out with the 6-pack of beer. You hear those stories all the time. You're like, okay, well, that makes sense for the late 80s. That makes sense for the 70s or the early 90s. That doesn't make sense for 2020. It's just different. I mean, when I used to ride with my parents to the grocery store, a lot of the times, if it was nice outside, me and my sister would just sit in the back seat of the car, windows down, car off or on, whatever, depends on the time of the year. We'd sit in the back seat of the car, windows down, and we'd play on our Game Boys or just kind of hang out, look around, look in the parking lot. There was no worries about someone kidnapping me or, you would never do that nowadays. In 2020, could you imagine going to the grocery store and looking to your side and seeing a car with 2 kids in it, windows down, nothing wrong, not having heat stroke, but just seeing them out in the parking lot? They'd call it the cops, It's just different. I mean, when I grew up, my grandma drank martinis every night, and I would sit there and she'd let me have a sip, or she'd give me her olives, or I'd eat her olives, or eat the lemon out of it, whatever. She wasn't washing them off to get all the gin off. And I'm not saying to give your kids gin. That's not the point of this podcast. The point is that if you take things from the past and you just put them in a vacuum here, it's very different, right? It's like kid buys beer in 2020. Kids left in car while parents shop, 2020. Like those things look real bad when you change the lens to today, right? So the blackface and all that stuff, people will get canceled, and I do think it's ridiculous. I don't think it's correct. I think stuff changes. I don't want to spend the whole podcast on Jimmy Kimmel, but I think it's fair to say that things change. Taste or movies or TV, you see it all the time. And, so I'm not championing for Jimmy Kimmel. I'm not sitting here saying, let's give Jimmy another chance. I think he will get canceled, but it's just crazy to see the sword of justice or the sword of purity being swung at by these people, and then they end up the ones who it gets swung on. So tough scenes, absolutely tough scenes for Jimmy Kimmel. And before we get into the Confederate flag thing, because the Confederate flag thing is about to be a big part of this show. Trust me, it might be the entire rest of the show. Let me go ahead and talk about our sponsors here, ladies and gentlemen. Have you seen those billboards? You know what billboards I'm talking about. The one call, that's all. One click, that's it. 15 minutes or less. Have your entire life figured out. That's a bunch of garbage, ladies and gentlemen. When you say, oh, it took me 15 minutes to do it. Oh, I only had to click one thing on the website. Oh, one call and I had it all figured out. What should you be talking about? Ordering a pizza, maybe? Calling someone in jail? Not the security of your life, of your family, not your future. If you get T-boned by some 18-wheeler, you get blasted, your leg dangling, bones fractured, shrapnel of your leg is hanging out on the street, You're bleeding out. You may never walk again. You've got 3 kids. You've got your entire future to try and deal with. You got to figure all this stuff out, and you have no clue about law. You have no clue about where to start. I don't think you're going to figure all that out in 15 minutes. Where can you figure that out? I'm glad you asked. You can figure that out and more if you call the good folk at Mackard, Anderson & Associates, PLLC. They are the presenting sponsor of the show and of this podcast. Great friends of the podcast. Give them a call, 601-450-1715, or go to their website, mackhardlaw.com, MCHARDLAW.com, based in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Look, I'm not going to tell you they can handle all your stuff in 15 minutes because that would be unfair to me. That would be unfair to you. I wouldn't want you to go somewhere where something this important was solved in 15 minutes, okay? This isn't what they're all about. What they are all about is listening to your problems, taking your intake, having you call, listening to your answers, asking you questions, all complimentary. They're going to say, we'll do your intake. We'll do all that part. Take your time. Don't rush. Don't have a timer. Don't have a stopwatch where you're going, holy shit, it's 12 minutes in. I only have 15 minutes. Oh my God, I gotta solve all my life's problems. I gotta figure out this termite litigation. I only have 48 seconds left. This is terrible. Don't worry about that, okay? This isn't one of those billboard lawyers. These aren't those scuzzo billboard guys who spend their entire marketing budgets on some big bright-ass yellow billboard. No. The guys at Mackard, Anderson & Associates put their dollars where they need to be, a.k.a. right here, because they know this podcast has the smartest listeners on the planet, and those listeners, if they have issues such as termite, 18-wheeler, automobile crashes, insurance denials, anything like that, if you have questions, concerns, and need answers, need the best in the business, if you say, man, you know what I really need? I need the only firm in Mississippi that's getting 7-figure settlements. 7-figure settlements. That's James Charles money. That's Kylie Jenner money, okay? If you're looking for the only firm in Mississippi that can deliver a 7-figure settlement, you don't go walking around the city looking up in the sky trying to find the nearest billboard. Don't do that. Just go to mackhardlaw.com, MCHARDLAW.com, or call 601-450-1715. Do yourself a favor. When you call, tell them you heard about them from the James Skrmetta Show podcast, or that James Skrmetta sent you, and they will send you right to the front of the line, red velvet robe, champagne buckets, the VIP treatment. They will get you up front. They'll take care of you. They're the best in the business. I don't know what else to tell you besides the fact that they're not going to give you one call. They're not going to give you 15 minutes. They're going to give you everything they got and much more to secure your future and your family's future. Go with Mackard, Anderson & Associates, not with the scuzzy guys who spend 99% of their marketing budget on billboards. Trust me, you don't want to do that. Now let's get back to the actual show here. The Confederate flag, ladies and gentlemen. The Confederate flag. As someone who grew up and lives in the South, the deep South, the deepest South actually, I live in Confederate flag country. And that's not even a slight. That's not me saying, oh, I live by a bunch of rednecks, or, oh, I live by the fried chicken buffet down the street where a lot of lifted trucks go. That's not saying that. I literally live in the city and grew up and born in the city where the president of the Confederacy lived. In my city, 2 miles down the road, right now, we could take a field trip. We could do a live podcast on the grounds. Is the main Confederate Museum, whatever you want to call it, in the world. And it's a real thing. There is a school in my city called Jefferson Davis Elementary School. My parents, they went to Jeff Davis. There were schools named these kind of things. There are Robert E. Lee streets. This is an area, obviously a lot of the South is like that, where you have, ties to the Confederacy, but the president of the Confederacy called where I live home. So I feel like I may be a little bit more, apt to speak on the Confederate flag and Deep South culture and Deep South history than most. In the last podcast, we said the same thing. I said, look, I'm in the Deep South, baby. When you want to talk about systemic racism, we've got it. Okay, I can talk about it in spades. And the Confederate flag is no different. And the Mississippi flag is under attack for people trying to remove it as well. My neighbor, for a long time when I moved here, flew the Mississippi flag. I haven't seen it in a while, but it's replaced with a Trump flag. But that's neither here nor there. So let's get to, and man, this is one of those subjects. I'll tell you this: if you bring this kind of stuff up at the Christmas table, at the Thanksgiving table, at a family function down here, you will be eating your food outside. You will be eating whatever the hell y'all are serving in the driveway. This is not something that's talked about. This is not something that's like, hey, Uncle Larry, what? I see you have the Dukes of Hazzard car out in the driveway. What do you think about the rebel flag? Doesn't go well. A lot of mascots down here for high schools were rebels. Then that was changed. Obviously a lot of people did away with the mascot of rebels. Ole Miss, Mississippi, the college, they did away with calling themselves the rebel. They did away with the plantation owner looking mascot. So look, man, what I'm trying to say is, I'm no historian, but this is as close as you can get to ground zero of this debate. Now, let's start with the people defending the flag. Okay, and we're going to talk about the rebel flag. We're not going to talk about the Mississippi flag. We're talking about the Confederate flag. So, it's hard to understand if you aren't from the South. But I can go ahead and tell you, and I don't care about the rebel flag. I don't have any rebel flag clothing. I don't have any rebel flag bikinis. I don't care about it. But I can go ahead and tell you that the rebel flag for a lot of people is legitimately just a sign of their Southern heritage. Straight up. It's a sign, from Dukes of Hazzard, Leonard Skinner. Oh, I almost said Lincoln Park. Lincoln Park did not use this flag. Leonard Skinner used this flag. So for people who grew up in those eras, for people who are probably, 50, 60, 70 even, maybe a little bit younger, a little bit older, somewhere in there, the rebel flag was synonymous with just kind of the good old boy, Southern, just that kind of, that culture. And there is a huge group of people who proudly fly that flag to say, I am from the South. And, I have an uncle. My uncle has the rebel flag, like the license plate on the front of his truck. And he's not a racist. He's far from a racist. But he's a good old boy who hunts and fishes and loves camo and loves his chocolate lab. And he that's who he is. And that's what he thinks it is. He looks at it as, that is the South. That is my heritage. That is my culture. Now, on that same token, there's absolutely no doubt, it is without question, that the rebel flag also, for some people, is a sign of white supremacy. 100%. 100% hate groups use it. Some just flat out racist use it. 1 zillion%. Even if you go back to the actual Confederacy, right? If you go back to the actual Confederacy and what the Confederacy stood for, you could say, okay, well, this is tied to racism and slavery and all that. And that's where I think the big problem is right now, is that you have people who are divided, not by their own, by their own means, or their own choice, but just because it is a symbol of two very different things. Very different things. And they're both kind of alive and well. We heard, or I might be getting this wrong, but the Nazi symbol is also the symbol of a religion, I believe. And it's one of those deals where, the Nazi symbol flourished way more than religion, and it kind of took over. The Confederate flag is like, hey, it's a Southern culture thing. Hey, it's also about racism. And they both kind of equally exist. So it's hard to be like, it's hard to say, hey man, no one really uses that racially anymore. Or hey man, it's not really a hate group thing anymore. Because it is. But simultaneously, you can't be like, hey man, no one uses that as a shout out to the South. No one uses that like that anymore. They do. I promise you. They do. If you come down here during Mardi Gras, people push these little grocery cart looking things with flags and hats and, you know, like water guns and just like inflatables. And on those carts, it'll be like the American flag, the New Orleans Saints, LSU, a rebel flag. Like, it'll be there. If you go into any of the surf shops, the little beach shops or whatever around here, there will be rebel flag shot glasses, rebel flag bikini, stuff like that. And bathing suits, whatever. It is very much alive and well for just a Southern cultural heritage. Now, that's just kind of a foundation on how it lives right now. Because it is linked to racism, and I certainly don't have a problem, or I'm not confused when people, have a problem with it. It doesn't surprise me that people have a problem with the rebel flag. And due to that, I think it should be removed from, banks and libraries and, public places like that. Now, this is where we get you got to use a little critical thinking here. Although I believe that it should be removed from places like that, because it is kind of hard to determine. It is kind of this fluid thing where it can mean all kind of stuff. I don't think the rebel flag is inherently racist. Like, if I see someone with a rebel flag shirt on, okay, to me, it should not be, oh, well, that guy's a racist, right? I think then you have to decide, okay, this guy is either a racist, and he's using it because he's a white supremacist or whatever, or he may just be one of those guys who has pride in the South. Now, this is very difficult for 2020 because 2020 is all about immediate reaction, short term. I see this, I think this. Blackface, bad. Rebel flag, bad, right? Christopher Columbus, bad. That can't be it for the rebel flag. That can't be it for the Confederate flag. Should it be on the Capitol building? Should it be on a bank? No, because nothing like that should be on a bank, right? Nothing that is all over the place, and it can mean 15 different things. It shouldn't be on the front of a bank. And a lot of stuff is like that, right? So, like a rainbow, for example, okay? The Hawaii football team, the college in Hawaii, they're called the Rainbow Warriors. That doesn't mean they're like a pro-homosexual group out there playing football, at like a charity thing. It's just a cultural thing in Hawaii, like with the rainbow. So when stuff like that can mean multiple things, you can't just be like, oh, this guy's a rainbow, he's gay, right? Like that in 2020, that's crazy to think that. It's crazy to jump to that level. Again, not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, let's not get, I know I don't have to take these precautions with the listeners on this show, because the listeners on this show's critical thinking is through the roof. But, if you see a rainbow or a Confederate flag, it shouldn't be, you believe this, you believe this. There should be a little bit of a, hey man, are you from Hawaii? Hey, are you homosexual? Hey, are you from the South? Are you a huge racist? Like there needs to be a little bit of a decipher going on to where you can, in your own person, you can have pride in the Confederate flag. You can have pride in where you're from. With that being said, you do have to understand also that people could take offense with it. Now, I don't think people should, judge immediately on the Confederate flag. And even at places like NASCAR, should it be at a place like NASCAR? Probably not. That's a public place. You should probably eliminate it from public places like that because it is so divisive. It can be controversial. It can be, upsetting for people. And that's totally, totally understandable. The fact that hate groups use it, right? The fact that those, huge racists, that's their rallying cry. The fact that that's a thing, I think you do have to treat this with kid gloves. You do have to treat this differently. I don't think it's just like a, hey. That's our damn heritage, right? It's like, it is, but it also is a sign of racism. It's also a really, really controversial thing. Both parties should understand that. If you're flying the Confederate flag and someone says, hey man, that offends me. You should be prepared to understand why that offends them, and you should be prepared to say, look, man, I get it 100%. You know, I'm flying this because this is part of my culture, it's part of my heritage. I don't view it like that. And then you have the discussion and you go from there. All right? But I'm going to tell you this, you're going to make it really hard on yourself by flying it. And I think that we should move away from it. We should, you know, slowly get away from the rebel flag because it is linked to such a sensitive subject, and it is obviously in some connotations, you know, very racially charged. So it makes it easier on everyone involved to just move away from it. Now that leads me to the Confederate. Well, let's backtrack because I hear this argument a lot with the Nazis. So the current argument is that people say stuff like, "Well, it's part of my history. It's part of history." And you hear people who are like, "Well, they don't wave the Nazi flag in Germany to remind people of the Holocaust." And I think that's also kind of unfair because just like I just said, right now, not everyone is waving that for that, right? Not everyone has the rebel flag for that. Some people, I'm telling you, it sounds crazy, but some people are honestly not racist at all, no prejudice. They 100% just believe that it's a Leonard Skinner thing. They just believe it's a Dukes of Hazzard thing. And you gotta kind of feel for them. You gotta kind of understand. They're from the 70s, the 80s. They grew up with it everywhere, right? They grew up with it no problem. They grew up with it on Budweiser cans. They grew up with it on top of cars. They grew up with it all over the place. So all of a sudden, for them to be like, to understand that it's racist, that's never gonna be a thing. Because to them, it's just not, okay? It's a totally non-existent situation, but if you took someone from the religion that the Nazi symbol was in, I'm not even sure which religion it is now, but I feel like it starts with a J. If you take someone that's actually in that religion, would you force them to quit using the symbol of their religion? No. That would be wrong. But they should understand why it would get weird looks. They should be prepared to understand, right? And then the people condemning them, if they say, "Hey, dude, I see you have a Nazi shirt on," that pisses me off because I'm Jewish. If they say, "No, man, look, I understand why you get that. This is my religion, you know, the religion of whatever. This is the logo of it." The person who's upset should then be like, "Oh, okay, well, I understand you're not. Okay, I got you. No problem. We'll just, you know, be careful out there, I guess." Like that should be the whole conversation. Same with the Confederate flag. Nobody my age that I know is flying the Confederate flag because of Southern heritage. Because it wasn't a thing when we were growing up. We didn't have the Dukes of Hazzard. We didn't have, you know, I mean, it's just a different thing. It's a generational thing. And, you know, so I think that comparing it to like the Nazi flags or statues of Hitler or whatever, I think that's a little bit much, to be honest. And, you know, it's everyone, I talked to a few people before this podcast and just kind of asked them what they thought about it. And everyone kind of echoed the same thing. Like, hey, man, you know, I get it. Like, if people, you know, I mean, I get it. I get why people would be upset with it and take it down, you know. It shouldn't be in front of the banks. It shouldn't be in front of, you know, the city capitol or the state capitol. It should, you know, take it down. If people are offended by it, I understand why they're offended by it. It's probably better if it just goes down, right? And that's how I feel. Is that, do I think it's offensive? Well, obviously not. I mean, you know, but like, would I wave it offensively? No. You know, to me, I view it as that's the South. That's the old South. My heritage, my culture, whatever. I understand that. You know, but when people say, "Hey, man, that's a symbol of racism," it's like, okay, man. If you think that, I can see why. Take it down, 100%. So I'm of the belief that because it is racially charged for some people, justifiably, it's better to just remove it for the state. It's better for the South to just distance yourself from that, 100%. And I think it's super weird for people to be like super tied to it, you know, because then it's like that's not. Like, the flag is a symbol at the very maximum on both sides, right? It's like, that's my heritage. Well, the flag's not your heritage. The flag is like the symbol of the South. If you have pride in the South, And I have incredible pride for the South. I love being from the South. I love being from the Deep South. And, but I'm not tied to the flag. Like, the things that I care about aren't the flag. The things I care about is that slow living, the easy living, people just respecting each other, politeness, Southern food, the good weather, people saying y'all, people saying, people holding the door open for each other, people saying, how you doing? Good morning. The South is a different place than the rest of the world. And I love the South for all the things like that in the South. I don't love the South because of the flag. All my memories of growing up, all the great things that happened down in South Mississippi, all those fantastic things, they didn't happen because of the flag. They happened because of the people in the South. They happened because of the ideals and the what makes people from the South who they are. That's why it happened. It's not the flag, it's not the stars, it's not the colors, nothing to do with that. Just like if you went to Ole Miss. I didn't go to Ole Miss, but if you went to Ole Miss and you loved your time in college there, and you went there when Colonel Reb was a thing, and they take away Colonel Reb, it may upset you because, it was tied to when you were there, but you didn't have a great time or you didn't enjoy your collegiate years at Ole Miss because of Colonel Reb. He was kind of a part of it, I guess. He was visually there, but he had nothing to do with the people you met, or he had nothing to do with the experiences you had, just like the rebel flag didn't. And if you like Leonard Skinner, and look, I like Leonard Skinner. I'll tell you this right now. If you're laying out in the backyard, sun's beaming, mid 80s, low 90s, you got suntan, you're lotioned up head to tippy toe, you got a nice chest of beer, and you're blaring some Skinner, it's hard to beat that. It's hard to beat it. No lie. But it's not because I'm like, man, I love this Leonard Skinner right now, because I'm just picturing them waving that damn flag. I don't care about the flag. I'm not picturing them at all. I'm just listening to the music. All I'm picturing is which truly I'm about to get next. That's all. So, for the people who, and there may be some people listening to this who, a lot of the people who listen to this are probably from the South. And a lot of them may be thinking, well, it is kind of my culture. For you, I would go back and I'd think about, is it though? Is it? Is it really? Just like I said, I live right by this Confederate, monument, basically. And we took trips there, like field trips, when I was in elementary school, when I was a little kid. The Confederacy, the Confederacy losing the Civil War isn't the same thing to me as the Saints losing to the Rams. It's not the same thing as the Saints losing to the Vikings. Is it part of the city? Is it part of the state? Yeah. But is it part of me as a Mississippian? No, it's not. It's not part of me. Was it part of the foundation of the country and of the state and of the cities and all that stuff? No doubt about it. Just like Christopher Columbus and just like whatever, Johnny Appleseed. Those way back when, that may have affected history and it may have affected where you are, I guess, but it doesn't affect you. And don't let those things affect you. They don't make you. The idea that me being born and raised in South Mississippi, the idea that the Confederacy is part of who I am is insane. It couldn't be any further, nothing to do with each other. If you're born in Germany, right? It's not like, hey, man, you're intertwined with that Nazi. It's like, no, it's got nothing to do with it. Is that a huge part of history? Did that shape that culture? Did that shape, their history, that place's history, the foundation of the area? Whatever. But the people, the individual people, they're absolutely not. So the flag, and this is going to lead us into the statue argument, which may be the final thing we talk about because we're kind of going along here. But the flag is divisive right now. It really shouldn't be, because both sides should. This is one of those things where you should agree to agree. You should agree and say, hey, it's racist, and then agree and say it's more than that. It's a little bit of like a Southern heritage for some people, and both sides should say, I understand that, man, and if you're going to be racist about it, it should be removed, If it's your heritage, keep it to yourself and whatever. It's not. It should not continually be this huge argument every so often, every few years. And I've heard this debate. The last time we had a mayoral debate down here, this was like a huge issue. Was should we remove the Mississippi state flag? So hopefully people, look at it that way. But let's go to the statues now. So this is another thing that happens all the time, is the idea of destroying these Confederate statues or destroying statues of Columbus or whatever. And it's kind of, it's a little bit of the same vein with the flag, where it's like, well, look, man, I mean, like, should there be a statue of Jefferson Davis? Should there be a statue of Robert E. Lee? Like, where do these statues come from? Why are they here? I don't get it, And there should be a long look at it. I mean, a lot of these statues were created in the Jim Crow era, right? A lot of these statues aren't even from back in the day like that. So I think it's important to understand where the statues came from, what they're there for, and then do whatever you want with them. If a statue has been there because Jefferson Davis founded that area and he erected a statue of himself and it's been there for blank however many years, yeah, it's probably like, well, this is a literal historic piece. It's the same as whatever, if you found a pair of Hitler's slacks. It's like, should we destroy that pair of Hitler's slacks? If you found Hitler's first edition of Mein Kampf that he wrote in a notebook, you wouldn't just burn it like it was, you wouldn't just burn it immediately and throw holy water all over it. You would be like, oh, wow, this is a huge piece. This is a historical piece. You're not saving it because you love Mein Kampf. It's like, this is obviously a thing. Now, if it was a statue erected in 1965 by some weird cult group and they, it's like, okay, well, get rid of it. Get rid of it. So just like the flag, everything does have, you got to go a little deeper than just the skin. No pun intended. Now, this is where I think things get a little too crazy. George Floyd was killed in Minnesota by a policeman. And some people think the way to get justice for that is to topple a statue of Columbus in like Boston. That's where I'm like, all right, guys, we are not prioritizing our efforts enough here. Like, that's not the move. If I have weeds at my house, and I'm like, dude, I gotta get rid of these weeds. I got weeds in my house. They're destroying my property. They're the worst thing that ever happened. They are a poison to my community. I gotta get rid of them. If I get rid of these weeds in my yard, the yard will flourish and everything will come together. And then some guy in Alabama is like, hey, dude, there's been some weeds over here in this forest for like 200 years. I'm about to burn the shit out of these weeds. It's like, that's great, dude. That doesn't fix my problem. Nobody lives in that forest over there. No one cares about those weeds. There are weeds in my community right now, dude. I need these gone. They're in my neighborhood. My whole neighborhood is being affected by these weeds. These weeds are happening right here. Can we please handle these weeds? And then 1,000 people take all the weed and feed, and they go out into the middle of the damn woods where nobody cares about it, where it's been there for hundreds of years, where it's not affecting anything, where no one would even know it existed. And they go and destroy those weeds. And they throw a party, and they're like, we got them, baby. We got the weeds. We took care of it. The weeds are done. And then they come back to their actual neighborhood, to where it actually is happening, to where it's actually affecting things, and the weeds are still there. That's my problem with the Columbus statues. We don't even know if Columbus existed. Not to be tinfoil hat here, but George Washington, Christopher Columbus, who knows, okay? This is the same government who murdered Jeffrey Epstein to cover up a giant pedophile ring. You think toppling a statue of Chrissy Columbus, who maybe existed, who the hell knows? George Washington, was he really 6'6" with wooden teeth? Probably not, okay? I mean, like, groups fighting racism by destroying statues of Christopher Columbus is like arbor groups destroying statues of George Washington for chopping down a cherry tree. It's nothing. It's nowhere near like actually handling the problem. Arborist groups, go fix trees that are here. Go put your efforts towards trees that are here. Don't go destroy a statue of George Washington because he may or may not have destroyed a cherry tree. And man, I hope I'm getting this right because I really don't want to. We're like an hour into the podcast. Did George Washington cut down a cherry tree? I got to find this out. Great news. George Washington did chop down the cherry tree. Whew. You see what I'm saying, though? Is that if you're trying to protect the trees, don't do it by just like dealing with something that may or may not have happened however many years ago. What the hell does George Floyd's murder have to do with whatever Christopher Columbus may or may not have done? What, like, you got to be really damn confident in whatever the hell Christopher Columbus did to somehow equate that back to George Floyd. George Floyd's situation should be handled by, better training for police, better vetting of who the hell the police officers are. It should be handled by, a real overhaul of the police situation, complete revamp of training, complete revamp of how police officers are selected, complete revamp of all that stuff. It should be a clean sweep of all the corrupt cops, all the bad cops. It should be justice for the cop, or justice for George Floyd and whoever else is dying by police brutality, by arresting these cops and sentencing these cops and trying these cops. It should be handled by that. It should be handled by education systems in the inner cities. It should be handled by better education systems just overall. It should be handled by really combating racism here, now, in these cities, or really just in the nation. It shouldn't be combated by dealing with Christopher Columbus, who, for all we know, all he did was roll up on Plymouth Rock and give syphilis to a bunch of Indians. Like, we don't know what the hell he did. He has nothing to do with the racial injustices of today. And honestly, guys, it demeans the racial injustices of today by saying, hey, George Floyd, hey, whoever else, we know you died. We know this is really bad. We definitely know this is an injustice. We're going to fix this by going to this park 2,000 miles away and toppling this statue of Christopher Columbus, and no one will give a shit about this at all. And it's like, if you think that is good enough to be like a, kind of like a trade-off, then you don't understand how big the problem is, right? Every single time I see a video of 100 people breaking down a statue of some guy who probably didn't exist, every time I see that, it's like, why aren't y'all actually in the city? Why aren't y'all actually, promoting and protesting and working towards things that will actually change what the problem is? Just like the weed metaphor. Just like the weed metaphor. If all those people focus their efforts on their own neighborhood and the weeds that they see every day, the weeds that are affecting them every day, the weeds that are growing into their yards and growing and affecting their children, and the weeds that their children will have to grow with if they own those houses. Do you see the metaphor? Do you get the parallels? I don't have to explain this, right? I don't have to go. We're all there. I'm sitting here trying to give y'all a metaphor on the fly. As I go deeper into the metaphor, it makes more sense. Please don't tell me. Please don't tell me I'm losing you. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds here to catch up. Find the metaphor. Find the parallel. The weeds are racism. Okay, I'll give you a hint. The weeds are racism. The yards, the neighborhoods, that's our community. That's our society. That's the only hint I'll give you. So we have to do better with prioritizing what we're actually fighting, or how we're fighting it. Just like when I saw all these people, and just like we talked about some of the podcast, when we saw these people looting or whatever, and they're taking pictures and taking Instagrams and taking TikToks, and you see these behind the scenes pictures of people holding a drill, and then they get their picture taken, they put down the drill, and they go home. Just like these celebrities who just don't get it. These celebrities who are sitting in their multi-million-dollar mansions in the Hollywood Hills, and they're making some terrible-ass video, about white privilege or whatever it's going to be. It's like, hey, guys, if y'all would get off of your Zoom meeting call or whatever you did to set up this terrible-ass song or this terrible video, if y'all quit doing that, if y'all didn't do those videos, and you actually took all of your money and all of your power and all of your clout and all of your resources and turned that into actually fighting the racism, I think we'd be better off, right? Like, we'd be better off with you pushing all of those resources into your cities and your communities than you collectively getting together and doing these, collab videos. So that's kind of how I look at the statue thing. The Confederate statues, if they're a piece of history, I don't think we should go out just washing history away, no matter really how bad it is. I keep referencing Mein Kampf and Hitler, even though I said earlier the Confederacy and Nazi Germany aren't the same thing. But this is also something you hear all the time, right? Like, should Mein Kampf be sold? Should it be in bookstores? And I always say yes. I always say, you gotta, history, like bad history or whatever, isn't something that should just be eliminated. People should learn from it, understand it, see what happened with it, see the bad parts, see how we overcame it, and see how not to repeat it. I don't see, and now some people, and it's not a blanket answer, guys. Like, that's why it's so hard. That's why, doing this podcast, it's like, what I'm saying, I can definitely understand where people would say, well, what about the hate groups who use Mein Kampf as propaganda? It's like, well, I mean, yeah. Like, yes, that's a bad use of it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the proper way to use it, right? Just like the Confederate flag. It's like, well, hey, man, I know you said the thing about some people use it as a Southern heritage. Well, some people use it as a hate symbol. I agree with you, right? So it's one of those things where it's not yes or no. It's not this way or that way. There is a gray area here. There is an area where it's like, yeah, I mean, is Mein Kampf, should it be taught in elementary schools? Like, probably not. But if someone wants to read it and learn more about that history and learn more about what happened and the inner workings of his mind, like, sure, okay, I can see the benefits in that. These statues, really kind of the same thing. I mean, should we be building statues for Robert E. Lee or whatever right now? No. Should street names be named after him? No. Should, just like I keep referencing the place where the president of the Confederacy lived, his house is like the museum. So that's why it's so famous, is that it was literally his like home base. He has houses. He has a Confederate cemetery. Like, it is a historical ground. Should all of that be destroyed in the name of pushing forward racial injustices? No. Like, I think those are historical things. That's a historic home that was built right there. And not to trivialize it, but it's just like when people go to San Francisco and they see the Full House. It's like, that's a thing. That's a thing. It's not a historical thing, but it's a thing, and it can exist. Just like this Confederate Museum, it can exist. Should we be building buildings and naming them after Jefferson Davis at this point? No, right? There shouldn't be streets. We shouldn't be honoring it, right? You don't honor the people, but you understand that they existed. You don't honor the Confederacy, but it happened. So there was a statue or a saber or an outfit or a house or whatever the hell it is. It's not like a witch's outfit where you got to burn it at the stake. I think people get too caught up in the symbols, and they get too caught up in what things represent, what things mean, and they oversimplify stuff. And then you have other people who are fighting just to fight. You got one side of the aisle going, hey, he was the Confederate battle leader. He's a racist. We got to destroy his household. And then you have the other side of the aisle going, actually, the Civil War wasn't about racism. You got to be somewhere in the middle. You got to be somewhere in the middle where you go, I mean, I wouldn't have an airbrushed in memory of Jefferson Davis T-shirt, but I understand that he was a historical figure. We should probably learn about him. If his house is still standing, if Abraham Lincoln's house is still standing, okay, that's a historical thing. Let's keep it there, right? Like, you can be in the middle on this. It doesn't make you a racist. It doesn't make you a sympathizer. It doesn't make you a social justice warrior. You can be thinking critically during times like this. And that's really that's really where I want you to be on this. And that's really where I am on this. And just like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I'm not sure how long we've been going now, but so we're over an hour now. I know we're probably right at an hour. But in times like this, always, always, always lean on education, educating yourself, understanding the issues, reading, researching, really formulate your thoughts, because I cannot stress this enough. These are incredibly touchy subjects. These are incredibly difficult subjects to actually get through. Very difficult. You do not want to be the person who's jumping to one side or the other. All right, education is your best friend when it comes to stuff like this. And I'm not even talking about just the Confederacy, just any kind of thing boiled in racism or boiled in history or with all kind of, all kind of layers to it. And, peel the onion back. Peel the onion back. Take the time, make the effort. And if you don't want to take the time and you don't want to make the effort, don't say shit. Okay? Don't do like what Brett Favre did. What did Brett Favre do? Compared Pat Tillman to Colin Kaepernick. Let me see if I can find the actual quote here. He says, I'd assume hero status will, both will attain hero status, basically. And we understand what the hell Brett was saying. Brett was saying, well, look, they both gave up playing football for something they believed in. On the surface, I guess that's okay. But should you, especially Brett Favre, who is not playing, who has no reason to come out and say something, should he jump to one side or the other? No. If he would have just sat back and kind of been like, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, or even if he just stopped at Colin Kaepernick will attain hero status at some point. Why bring Pat Tillman into this? Why bring a guy who sacrificed his life serving in the military? Why do the comparison? So don't end up there. Don't end up where you have good intentions and you're trying your hardest, but you haven't fleshed it all out yet. Don't do that. But we are going to end the podcast right there. I hope things get better, guys. I really do. I hope things get better. I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't know. In the city I live in, or not the city I live in, the city next to where I live, the Buffalo Wild Wings just recently was in a thing where there was a story where they refused to serve cops. Like 2 cops came in to eat, and the kitchen staff heckled them out. And you hear stuff about all these businesses and these people just kind of taking matters in their own hands, and things are just sounding really bad, man. I'm not gonna lie to you. Things are sounding real bad, and it's hard to keep your head up. Hard to keep your head up. This weekend was Father's Day, and I'm lucky enough, to have my dad still around, and I know a lot of people don't. I know it's a really hard day for some people, and but I just couldn't help think, but and maybe this is the Mississippi in me, but I just couldn't help but think, when everything's falling down and everything is at its worst and everything that people rely on so much in society, if you do step back and you say, well, maybe just simplify it, just say, what do I need? Family, friends, that's it, really. Health, your own well-being. Maybe that's more important than your job or your social status or celebrities or whatever. This is a good time. I said this at the very beginning of the quarantine when the world was so different. But this is a good time to reflect and a good time to just detach, go somewhere. Obviously don't go on some cruise, but go walk down the beach, or go walk in the woods, or go do whatever you got to. Go in the park, wherever you are. Go up to the mountains and just detach and try and figure out what the hell is going on. Because when all hell hits the fan, and it's just as bad as it can possibly be, you are still with you, and you need to be able to rely on you. So good luck out there, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this podcast. Sorry about the week off, but it is what it is. So we're back, and it is what it is. We'll be ripping podcasts. We'll be deep diving into this stuff. This will be released on a Wednesday, so enjoy your Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your week. Keep your head up. Be healthy. Be happy. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, Macard Anderson & Associates, PLLC. It's tough out there, guys. But enjoy yourself. Thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it. Follow the show, review, rate the show, all that fun stuff. I will see you next time here on the James Skrmetta Show.